Hey, it's Sarah, and today I'm going to talk about Firebase in-app messaging on Android and iOS, and I'm also going to go over MOKO shared color resources. So to get started, first I'm going to show you the updates that I've made to my KMM app. So I'm here on my Android phone, and I have my phone set to Spanish. Now let me go ahead and go in and set it back to English. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to set the mode to dark theme. Now, with MOKO color resources, my app can easily switch from light and dark themes in my KMM app. So let me go ahead and click Next. And now here's where Firebase in-app messaging comes into play. So I have an analytics event that fires off when the onboarding screen is complete, and the analytics flag is called tutorial_complete. And once that fires off, it goes into Firebase and alerts it to send an in-app message to my app, and it says sign in for savings. So what I can do is, if I click create account, I'm using a deep link that goes right to my sign in screen. Pretty cool stuff. So let me go back out of that, and we'll go back in here to the home screen, and now you can see that it doesn't actually prompt again. It's only going to fire off once for the app, and that's a setting that you can do in Firebase. And now here I also have the dark theme applied, and if I go back to my light theme, there we go. I'm back to my light mode, and all of this is set in my composable, and I'll show you how that looks in a minute, but first let's go ahead and see how this looks on the iOS side of things. Now here in iOS, let's do the same thing. My phone is set to Spanish, and the UI is using the MOKO color resources. So I'll go in and let's go ahead and change it back to English. And I've also set the mode to dark. So now let's go back into the app, and here we go. MOKO color resources has switched everything over to dark mode. Now when I click next, just like in the Android app, I get the in-app message that pops up to sign in for savings and create an account. So again, I click create account, and this takes me directly to the sign-in screen. If I go in and change the settings back to a light theme, now in iOS I can go back to my app, and here we go. The MOKO colors have switched back to the light theme, and I can click next, and now I have my results from the API. Before I get into the Firebase setup, first I'll go over how MOKO color resources work. So if I go into my shared module, and I'll go into build.gradle, and I've already gone over some of this in my first video, but let me just go through it again. So I've added the ice rock dependencies here, and then we'll go down. And this is really important. So in the CocoaPods setup, in my framework, in order for the colors to work, I need to export this moko.graphics. In my previous video, I also wasn't exporting the MOKO resources. I was having an issue with it, and it turns out it was just an issue on my end for dependency versions. So for MOKO resources, just make sure to export the MOKO resources and the MOKO graphics, and then you'll be good to go. Okay, so we've got our source sets here, and in common main, you just want to make sure that you import all of your dependencies here. We're importing the MOKO shared resources right here. And then finally, for your shared resources to work, you will also need to just make sure that you include the multi-platform resources here and define what you want to call the class for your shared resources. So now, let me go into source, and I'll go into common and my resources. Now for the colors, under MR, you just create your colors directory, and you have a colors XML file, and this is really cool how this works. So you can define all of your color names, and I kind of went similar to the Material 3 theming, but I made it a little bit simpler. So I have my primary color, and this is what it looks like in light mode, and this is what it looks like in dark mode. And then I have light text, so that means this is going to show up lighter on a darker background. So these are the colors defined for light and dark mode. And then I have my dark text, which is just going to be like normal black text against a lighter background. And then I have my background color here, and the card surface, which is for the list that shows up with all the API results. This is all you need to do to define your colors. So next, let's see how you actually access them from Jetpack Compose. So I'll go into my Android app next, and let's go into the presentation, and we'll go into the onboarding screen first. Let's go up here. So what I've done is I've created a little helper class, and I can call theme colors.background to color. And let me show you what this looks like. So theme colors, here's my little util class. Theme colors equals the shared resource dot colors, and that's pulling from the multi-platform block that we set up in the Gradle file. So then I have just two little helper functions, color resource from ID, so I can call it color resource and then call the MOKO color resource resource ID. And then here's the best convenience function here. It's an extension function off of color resource. So it's color resource dot to color, and then I'm just calling the Jetpack Compose color resource and passing in the resource ID. So very simply, I can just get access to these colors, and this is how it's going to change from light to dark mode. And what's really cool is if you go in here, let's go into here and let's go into the background color. And this is coming from the shared resource.kt file that's automatically created when you build your project. Now, if I go into here, this is really cool. You can see how it's separated. So I have a values color.xml and I have a values night colors.xml. So this is created all by just simply defining your light and dark mode in your single XML file. So I was really happy with the way it worked. It worked great on Jetpack Compose and with iOS. And so let's go back to the onboarding screen. So here I define the background for the column, which is this orange crush right here. And then for the button, I can define my colors. So my background color is the primary to color, and then the content color is the light text, because again, I want this lighter text on this darker background. It's the same exact thing for the home screen. So we'll go into here and we'll go into the lazy column. And again, I can just simply define my theme colors, card surface, to color. So very easy to use, very simple. And I'll show you what this looks like in iOS too. So let's go to the onboarding screen. And let's go ahead and load up the preview here. It's really easy to test in iOS too. I can just simply flip between light and dark mode. For some reason, let me go back into Android Studio. I had a little bit of problems with the previews not showing up correctly. Sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't. And I think that maybe it has to do with just building the project. But let's go back to iOS here. Okay, now that the preview is loaded, from here in iOS, I can just click this little switcher here and turn on the color scheme. And I can say light, dark, this is really cool. It just changes right away, and I can see everything right away in the preview. Now for my button, it's very similar. I'm calling background, color, and resource, and I'm passing in .primary. So again, I have a helper util for this as well, and we'll go into utils, MOKO utils, and I have another extension function, and it's on swiftui.color. But this time I'm passing in the key path to my shared resources.colors, and this is of type color resource. And then I just pass in get UI color. So what this does is when you call this get UI color, it is calling color first. So it's wrapping this to get UI color in the color. And there you have it. It's just as simple as that. And then also I wanted to give you an update from my previous video. I was using a helper function in my common main for the strings, but now that I'm exporting the resources properly in my build.gradle file, I'm able to just simply call this text extension function, and I can call resource.desc.localized. And that's what's giving me the switch from my English to Spanish in my strings resources. And that's all there is to it, to color resources. Very easy to use, and I'm really, really happy with it. It's an awesome library, and so far sharing the images and the strings and the colors have just worked out great. So now let's get into the Firebase setup, which is a little more complex. And let's close all this and start fresh. So what I've done, the Firebase setup, since I already have my project set up, I created a couple images here that we can go through. So the first thing you need to do, of course, is set up your Firebase project. And then once you've done that, you need to add two separate apps. So you're going to need to add an app for Android, and you're going to need to add an app for iOS. And it's very important that you register the correct package name. So you want to make sure that you get the package name from your actual Android app. And go ahead and enter this in here. And then you'll also need to add your SHA-1. And now for iOS, I actually ended up renaming the bundle to Santansera KMM Firebase instead of the default one. So make sure you do that. I believe I had to do that for the deep linking in iOS. I think that's why I had to rename it. So go ahead and register your app. And then this is another really important step that's easy to forget. So even though you can add messaging once you've added your project, you also need to enable the Firebase in-app API from Google Cloud. So that's going to be separate. So it's not in the Firebase console. You actually have to go to the Google Cloud console and enable this API. And don't worry, you'll get warned in Logcat if you haven't enabled this, and you'll get a link directly to it. But it's just a really important step that's very easy to forget. So once that's enabled, the next thing you're going to want to do is go back to your Firebase console and click All Products, and you want to click on, let's see, where is it? In-app messaging here. I've already added it to my project, so what I did was I took a screenshot of what it looks like brand new. When you first click on it from your Firebase console, you're going to get messaging and create your first campaign. And now, when you create your first campaign, make sure to pick Firebase in-app messages. This is very different from push notifications. Just like we saw in the demo, it actually pops up sort of a dialog box instead of a notification that would show up on top of your phone. So in this case, we're going to choose Firebase in-app messages. Next, from the Firebase console, you can actually start creating and designing your campaign. So here's a little snapshot of what that looks like. And I've chose a model design, and you can set up the colors, and you can set up your title and the body. And now this is that button, Create Account. This is what took us to our deep link. So you can set up the text for that. And then here you specify the deep link that's going to take you to the sign-in screen, either from your Android or iOS app. Now let's get in what you need to do on Android in order to make this work from the Firebase console and have it talk to your Android app. So I'll go into my Android project and go into my build.gradle. Here I've enabled the plugin for Google Services, and also just to mention, you'll need to make sure that you add in your main build.gradle, make sure to add the Google Services plugin here and apply false. So here I'm applying it. And now here's where we can get our Android package name. And I'll go down to dependencies, and you just need to add, you want to add platform Firebase bombs, make sure you have that included. And then you add Firebase in-app messaging display KTX. And you also want to make sure to add Firebase Analytics KTX. And once you've set that up, you also need to make sure that you include your Google Services.json. I won't click on that because it has secret information, but just make sure that that is in the root directory of your Android app. And once that's all set up, that's pretty much all you need to do for the in-app messaging. But real quickly, since we're in Android, let's go into what you need to do in order for the deep link to work. So for that, I will go into Source, and we'll go into the Android manifest. And now here, in your main activity, you just need to add the intent filter, and here's for the deep link. So we add an action of view, a category of default, and then for the scheme, we're adding KMM. So that's going to be KMM://. And then for the host, we add sign in. And that's what directs us, that's what tells the main activity, hey, we have a deep link here, which composable should we go to? And that is then defined in the app nav graph. So here in the nav graph, I've got my composable and my sign in screen. And my deep link is a UI pattern, and I have this little helper class to manage all of my deep links, and I'm calling app deep link, path from type, and then I pass in an enum, which is a type of sign-in. So let's go into that and see what that looks like. This is in shared, and it's in common main, and I believe it's in domain app deep links. Yep. So here's the enum class, and we have a sign-in and unknown. Now this was pretty tricky because for KMM, I found it a little bit difficult to work with enums. We can't create an enum with a value and have it work well in iOS, as far as I know. And I played around with all kinds of stuff. I tried sealed classes and I tried different things, but I ended up doing this. There may be a more elegant way to do it, but I think that it works pretty well. So I have my two enums here, sign in and unknown. And now here I say object CName, and my Swift name for my companion object, I want it to be called utils. And in this companion object, I set up a deep links map. So I'm mapping sign in to KMM sign in. So now I have an enum to string value pair, which I can easily then create these little helper functions with. So I can get type from path. So if I'm passing in this path here, it's going to return me this enum here in this function. And if it's null, I'll just get unknown. And then inverted, I can pass in the type, so I can pass in sign in, and then I'll get the string back in this helper function. So this is a really helpful utility that I can use both in Android and iOS. So let's go back to our nav graph. So we're just getting this KMM sign-in path right here, and this is letting us know that, hey, when this little model screen pops up on Android and you click create account, let's go to the sign-in screen. Now for iOS, I had to do something similar. So let me click on my iOS app here, and under general, again, I mentioned I had to change my bundle identifier because I was getting some issue that it wasn't unique, and that's what I had to do in order to make it work on the Firebase console. I also upgraded my minimum deployment to 16 so I could use a lot of the new features in iOS for navigation and deep linking. And now you need to go to your info tab and go down to URL types, and you're going to want to add this. So I put in my bundle identifier here as the identifier, and then for schemes we have KMM here. And you don't need to worry about the host in this case like we did for Android. You just need to make sure that you have this KMM here. And once that's all set up, your deep links will be good to go. As for dependencies, I was able to do that all from the pod file. So in your pod, make sure to add Firebase Analytics Swift. And I also added Firebase In-App Messaging Swift for versions greater than 10.12/beta. And that should give me the latest one. And then finally, you have to add your Google Service-info, just like we added the Google Services JSON file in Android. For this file, make sure it's in the root directory of your iOS app folder. And now, to get the deep linking to work, I will go into my iOS app here. So to set up Firebase, I can easily do this. I don't have to create an app delegate or anything like that. I can just easily call Firebase app.configure in my init function. And then down here in my home view, I have on open URL. Now what I do is I check to make sure that the scheme is KMM, and I'm checking to make sure the host isn't null. And if it is, this function's just going to return and nothing's going to happen. And then here I just do a little debugging to make sure that I've actually entered into this open URL block. And then here, this is where I'm using the app deep link enum, and I can call .utils, which is what I defined for my companion object, and then I say type from path, so I pass in the URL absolute string, which is going to be KMM/signin, and that is going to return the actual enum value, so it's going to return just the sign-in. And now I have a custom router, and I say router.path_append, and I want to append this enum to the router path. So let me show you what the router looks like. This is just really simple. This is navigation in iOS. It's entirely different from Android, and it takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to use. So in my router class, it inherits from observable object, and then I just create this navigation path, and I have this little function here to reset it. So what that would essentially do is reset the backstack if I needed to. With the router path appended, now it's time to handle this on OpenURL event. And I do this in the home view, so let's go into this. And then up here, I set an environment object to my router, and I pass that in from iOS main here. So I'm passing in environment object router. And now back in the home view, if we go down here, I've set up a navigation stack inside the main view. In this navigation stack, I pass in the router path. Now down here below the VStack, I set up navigation destination, and 4 is app-deep-link.self, and that just basically indicates the type of navigation. So the type in this case is the app-deep-link enum. And then I can say deep link in, choose destination, which is a function, for the deep link that's selected and sent to this navigation stack from my iOS app. So if I go down here, this is a view builder type, and it's choose destination, and with iOS I can say for go-to path, and my go-to path in this case is going to be sign in for the enum. So then I can say this returns a view, and then I can do a switch on my path, and if it's case sign in, go to the sign in screen, otherwise go to an empty view. And this is how the deep link is actually, so we get it from the main iOS app, we're adding it to the router path, and then it's triggered in this navigation stack, and then navigation destination, and then we're figuring out which view we want to go to. And that's how the deep links are handled in iOS. Finally, one more thing to show you in iOS. In order to get debugging from Firebase, go into Product, Scheme, Edit Scheme, and then make sure to add these two debug flags. So you want to debug for analytics, and you want to make sure that Firebase debugging is enabled. And once you enable these things, you'll be able to see all sorts of log outputs from Firebase. And another really important thing that you can see, and I created snapshots of this so I can show you. So let's go back into my images. So once you get that set up, in your debug window, if you filter for installation ID, you're going to see the Firebase installation ID of your actual device that's registered in the Firebase console for your device. And this is how Firebase in-app messages are going to be pushed based on this device ID. And this is also a really handy way to make sure you have everything set up and installed correctly. If you're seeing this installation ID, you know you're good to go. And then on Android, you can actually do the same thing. So just type in Logcat installation ID, and then you'll get the in-app messaging installation ID right here. And make sure to save this in a good place, because once you have it, you can actually test that from your campaign. So let me show you what that looks like. So when you're in there editing your Firebase campaign, there's a little button over here. You can't see it because it's blocked, but you just click Test on Device, and it's going to open this little pop-up here. So you can add that installation ID right here in this box and click Test, and that's going to allow you to test. As long as your campaign is in draft mode, you can test the campaign on your device and make sure you get the pop-up, make sure everything's looking good. But the cool thing about campaigns is you can have them fire off based on an analytics event. So let me go to my Firebase console here, and I'll go to messaging. And let's see, we'll go into the iOS one, edit. So here's my campaign, and we've already looked at this. And if we click next, we have a target. And this is just where you either pick your Android app or your iOS app. So I'll click next here. Now here under scheduling, this is where I can actually have it show up after an analytics event. And the event that I chose was tutorial complete. And this fires off when the onboarding screen is actually completed. So let's go back into the Android app, and I'll show you how that works. In my shared module, under domain, I have an iAnalytics service. just because a lot of this analytics stuff is handled on the front end. Like Android handles the interactions on the client side, and so does iOS. And there's not a whole lot we can actually do in the shared module, but we can still have good architecture and create an interface here. So I created an iAnalytics service, and the function is complete tutorial. And that way, if we ever decide to change, let's say we don't want to use Firebase anymore, then we still have this interface that we can use, and we won't change anything in the back-end code. We'll only have to change the implementation that we're using. So let me go up to my Android app. Now here, to handle this implementation, I've created a services package, and I have App Analytics Service. And for this, I just inject my Firebase Analytics, and then I inherit from my iAnalytics service, and then I'm overriding the complete tutorial, and I just call analytics.logEvent, and I want to say tutorial complete. Coin is handling this Firebase Analytics injection here. So real quick, I'll go into DI app module, and this is just simply returning a singleton of Firebase Analytics. So that way I've got my interface, I've got my client implementation, and I'm all good to go. And I can even do the same thing on the iOS side. So let's go into Services, Analytics, and here I just call a class App Analytics Service, and I inherit from that interface that's actually in the shared module. And then I call Complete Tutorial, and I can just say log event, Analytics Event Tutorial Complete, and the parameters are nil. Typically, to call this function, I would call it from my view model in Android, but since I'm working with a KMM app, things are a little bit different, and again, like I mentioned, it has to be handled on the client. So to do this, in iOS it was pretty easy. Let me go to my onboarding screen here. So again, to maintain good architecture, solid principles, and to make sure that we can easily swap out the implementation, I'm actually passing in here the iAnalytics service, and so it's not this class, but it's actually the interface that I'm getting here. And this works great in iOS. This was my first time doing it and worked perfectly. So down here in the button, I just call analytics.completeTutorial, and then it fires off that analytics event, which Firebase console registers and logs. And then once it sees that event, then it fires off the message for the first time. And then after that, I call onScreenChanged, which actually is coming from the shared view model. In Android, it works very similar. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So I'll go back to my Android app, and I'll go into Presentation, and let's go into the onboarding screen. Here, because I'm using Coin, I can do some pretty cool stuff. So the onboarding screen just takes in onAnalytics event, and then what I'm doing is from my home screen, go up here. So I just inject the App Analytics service here, and then in my home screen layout, I pass the definition for complete tutorial into my home screen layout, which ultimately gets passed to the onboarding screen. So back in the onboarding screen, I just go down to my button, and I just call onAnalytics event. And again, because this is Coin, this is just getting the implementation, so it's a singleton of the App Analytics service right here. Here it fires off the tutorial complete event. Firebase console gets the message and then sends the in-app message to the Android app. And then just like iOS, it calls onScreenChanged, which is coming from the shared view model. That's it for today. In the next video, I'll go over how to use Firebase to send push notifications to both Android and iOS. Thanks for watching.